So you started out on the railway like an apprentice, like me. Did it vary any as to what it is now, and sort of how was your training started?
That's an interesting one. Nothing formal, very informal actually. Before I came here, I'd been a train spotter and a puffer nutter, and I knew all about steam engines because I nearly lived in the engine shed at Red Hill. I knew everything about railways except railway tracks,
Right.
because they'd always been there, and that's what everybody thinks. And they'll always be there, and nobody ever does anything to them except polish them to make them shiny on the top, right? And by a long and strange path, me and two guys from school came here on a Freedom of Wales train ticket all around Wales to get in all the engine sheds and see all the funny little railways, this being one of them. At the time I was working in a factory down in Red Hill with electronics, and we came here, right on the train, except, well, we didn't on the first time because my mate who knew everything said there's a train in the evening. There was on Wednesday, but this was Monday. So we walked across to Boston Lodge to see the engines, because my little book said that's where the engine shed is. And there was an old guy messing around polishing a funny engine with two chimneys. We got chatting with him, and he told us all about the railway and how it's all run by volunteers, and they even drive the engines. And I thought, wow, that sounds like it's for me, because I always fancied being an engine driver. Except when I was a, I don't know, kid, 10, 11-year-old, something like that, I played truant from school and spent most afternoons riding on the shunting engine at Reigate. And one day the driver said, "What do you want to do when you grow up, boy? An engine driver?" I said, "Oh yes." And he looked at me and he says, "Sorry," he says, "your eyes aren't far apart to look through both the portholes at once." And of course he was joking, but I took it seriously and I was ever so worried. So when I found this place with the smaller engines and the portholes are closer together, then, well, anyway, this old guy was Bill Hall. Billy Hall, he'd retired from British Railways, as it was then, before they kept changing the names.
Yeah.
So on the strength of that, me and one of my mates, we joined the Ffestiniog Railway Society, and we started coming down here once a month. Got introduced to railway track, sort of bashing things with big hammers. Okay. The first weekend I spent, we were literally knocking the rust off rails down in the woods to relay. These had come out the tunnel, and they were horribly coated with flaky rust. We just spent the weekend bashing them. Seemed fun. And then I decided I wanted to be a fireman.
Right.
So I spent 3 weeks of a holiday firing, 2 weeks with Garraway on his beloved Linda, 3 days on the Prince, and then 2 days on a double engine with Ivan Davis, which must be one of the most rapid climbs to double engine fireman ever. 2.5 weeks. And it was great fun. And then I got offered a job, just out of the blue. Went to Boston Lodge. Well, we were up here actually, and Ronnie Lester, who was the P-Way, Permanent Way boss in those days, just sitting somewhere around here having our lunch, and he says, "Interested in a job?" I thought, yeah. So he says, "You better go and see Garraway, the boss, who's down at Boston Lodge." How do I get there? That's your problem. So I knew there was a path over the hills across there, so I set off, lost the path somewhere, crashed all down through the trees, found the railway at Brynmawr, crashed on down the trees, got the road, got a couple of lifts, got to Boston Lodge, and there was Mr. Garraway going round oiling his engine. And I said, "Ron told me to come and see you about a job." And he said, "Oh, you want a job?" I said, "Yes." So he said, "When can you start?" I said, "Oh, I have to give notice and whatnot." So 3 weeks? Okay. And he disappeared under the engine with his oil can. That was my interview. So on the strength of that, I gave me notice in the factory. 3 weeks later, I came here on the Cambrian Coast Express with my bicycle and a couple of bags, And I turned up on the Monday morning, no letter of appointment, job offer, nothing, none of that bureaucratic rubbish. And turned up at Mymford on the Monday morning, and I never intended to stay here. It was kind of, let's have a good holiday, and play around up here for 6 months or so, and then I'll go back. Well, that was 1964. On the first day I was here, we were down at Mymford, and in those days we used the little brake vans, like number 1 and 2 they were in those days, for our living van. Crummy little things, with a little balcony on them, and a little door. And I was trying to get in this thing, and Ron, the boss man, was a little round man, little round glasses, little round face, little round cap, and everything, and a pipe in his mouth, internally. I think it had a hook, so it didn't fall out. And he was about 100 yards away, and I was wondering how you get in this thing, because it was locked. So he started shouting and waving his arms about. And he was trying to tell me, I've since discovered, that where the vacuum pipe comes up, and there's a wire around it, and there was a track spike. And because they got flattened ends, they were good for opening these carriage lock things. He was trying to explain that to me, but he was way down there, and he was going, and he started shouting more and more, and it was going through my head. This is the first day. I thought, I haven't come here to be shouted at by a little fat man. I'm going. And then I saw this spike. Yeah. And I thought, oh, I bet that'll open the door. And it did. So there you go. So I nearly didn't stay.
So I had a very formal introduction into the railway of sort of ensuring who my manager was. So did you actually have a manager that you were meant to report to and have somebody to train you, or were you pretty much just left to play at will?
Well, yeah, like there was no formality at all, and didn't even have a job description, no forms to fill in, everything. And at the end of the first week, I got paid. And if I remember right, I just left a job where I just had a pay rise to £10 a week, and I came here for £6.18 and something, I think it was, which was pretty well. I think that's probably right through the history of this thing. People have come here from well-paid jobs, and they've taken lesser paid on probably about the same ratio. Yeah, my manager was the aforementioned Ronnie Bear. Actually, his name was Ron Lester. Yeah. He was a nice bloke, but he didn't strike me as knowing an awful lot about track. He didn't strike me either as being particularly managerial. Right. He certainly didn't set about teaching me anything. It was just, there was a gang of about 6 or 7 people then, and in that gang was a guy who lived here at Tannable, Will Jones, who'd been involved with the railway as station master and a trackman since about, I think it was 1922.
So he knew his stuff about the railway then?
Yeah, inside out. Yeah. And there was another old guy called Evie Roberts, who'd been a plate layer, that's an old term as well, isn't it, on the Welsh Highland Railway. And when the Ffestiniog closed in 1946, Will had gone to work in the quarries, in the slate mines in Blaenau at one time, and I think so had Evie, because I remember some tale about Evie was pushing the little trucks of waste to the top of the tips, where they then tipped them over, and that's how those millions of tons of slate up there arose. And he pushed it too hard and it went over the edge.
Oh dear.
And the foreman came along and says, how the hell did you do that? And he said, like this. He pushed another one over the edge. That's the tale, I mean. Anyway, in the winter, we more or less all worked together. Yeah. And it was just pick the job up as you go. There was formal training, even the word training hadn't been heard of here in those days. You picked it up from the bloke. And we tended to work in pairs, so whatever you're doing, the 8-man gang was like 4 pairs, so whoever you were working with, you picked up their good and bad habits, really, you know. In the summer, a couple of the guys worked on the trains, guards, signalmen and so on, so the gang was smaller and we split the line was divided into two halves. By the time I came here, it was running to here, to Tannaball. And there was work just about to start on the next bit up to the house. But in the summer, it was down to 2 or 3 people on each section, and whatever volunteers there were around who would work with us. Yeah? Now, Ron, he liked going to the beach more than he liked working. And whenever it was a fine day, he'd come and say, I'm going off to the beach today, lads, and you can find something to do, can't you? That sort of thing. And a couple of times he sent me and a volunteer who was around at the time, we were working near Portmaddock, and he sent us up into the woods to go and work with Will and Evie, he said. And he said, where are they? Oh, they're up in the woods somewhere. So we get the train up to a little staff halt at a place called Rhwng, get off there, and just walk up the line till you find them.
Right.
No, the current safety briefing about walking on a line and everything, it didn't exist then. The train had gone up and you knew it'd come back, so you just watched out for it. Right. And we walked, and we walked, and we walked, and across Kaimauer, a great big embankment, and then you enter a stretch of continuous curves, and they all looked the same in those days, all covered with leaf mould. Yeah. And they just went round, 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 round. We kept going round another one, thinking there must be here. Eventually we came across these two old guys, and they were both getting on a bit by then. I say that now, they were both younger than I am now. And they were furiously packing or lifting the track where the track had depressed, and it was twisting and causing the train to rock around. Then they were levering it up with a crowbar and packing the only thing they got to pack. We didn't have ballast in those days. Yeah. They were packing, and many people give me a funny look when I say this, they were packing leaf mould underneath it. They were
packing leaf mould?
Yeah, because there's plenty of that around.
Well, fair enough.
And you mixed a few stones and you dug into the cutting side to get a little bit of meat in it, Yeah. And they were furiously doing this and jabbering furiously in Welsh to each other. Yeah. And me and this guy called Stephen Evans, if I remember right, who always had I think they called them wind cheaters in those days, done right up to here in the middle of summer, and a big bag on his back that he never took off, except to get his sandwiches out, which struck me as very strange. And we said, we've come to help you, and that seemed to flummox them a little bit, because they carried on chatting in Welsh about what they were going to do with us. And this happened 2 or 3 times, and we started to get to know these old guys. And then one of them, Evie, he fell off a bridge in Penryn, because he was using the crowbar to lever up the track. Didn't have much in the way of jacks in those days. No. Shoved the end of the crowbar under the sleeper, get a lump of rock and lever on it to prise it up, and somebody would pack it. And he slipped, the bar slipped out, and he went over the bridge. It was in those days by Nazareth Chapel. Not like today with nice parapets and everything. There weren't any of that sort of thing, and he went straight over it, crashed into the road. He broke his pelvis, one leg, and hit his head. Quite a bit of damage, so he was off sick for quite a while. So I got sent to work with Will, which was, I suppose, one of the quantum leaps over the years that caused me still to be here now. I think if I'd never gone to work with Will, I doubt whether I'd have stayed here long, because I wouldn't have got really interested in it. Because bear in mind I was still basically a train spotter.
So after this guy fell off the bridge, Will sort of became your sort of trainer, as you would say in those days.
Yeah, except that term didn't exist. Yes. I don't think you'd even find it in writing anywhere in 1964. So it was nothing to do with a training or a progression of the job or anything. It was Will's mate had fallen off the bridge. He needed another mate because he couldn't work by himself. So I was sent to work with him.
Partner in crime.
And essentially we had from Kaimauer to Tannaball, which was an awful bit of track. It really was. terrible. And obviously to start with, took a bit of getting used to him with me more than me with him, probably.
Yeah.
Because he had to speak English.
Well, yes.
Now, which is an interesting bit. If I'd gone to work with Will and Evie, I think, because I was, just 20, I'd be learning a new job, and I could have learnt the language as well, because they'd have spoken Welsh most of the time, and I'd have picked it up very quickly, I think. So that was a missed opportunity, I think. Since then, I've tried to learn Welsh 3 times.
Failed?
95% failed.
95% fails.
Which is sad, really, but there you go, can't do everything.
No, you can't.
So, yeah, went to work with Will. He lived at Tannable, and wherever we were working in this section, he would walk down to in the morning.
All right.
So I would either catch the 7:30 bus from Portmarnock or ride my bike along the bottom of the valley and then climb up to wherever we were.
All right.
Which was good exercise, good way of getting to know the place, I think,
Indeed.
you know. And so from sometime, this would be late summer of 1964, I think, it started, until Will retired in 1968.
Right.
Then, even though there was 6 or even 8 sometimes in the track gang, like I said before, we worked in pairs. So I worked one-to-one with Will
For 4 years.
for nearly 4 years.
Yeah.
And I've always said that's probably as good an apprenticeship,
Yeah.
in that I was learning a strange job, because I knew nothing about it,
Yeah.
with a strange railway, which was worn out,
Yeah.
no money, precious few tools, no spare parts. And if you read the whatever it's called, British Rail Track Design, Construction and Maintenance book, and then looked at this railway, you'd think it was about something completely different. And the great thing, well, there was a number of great things about it. Will was a smashing bloke. He was definitely the master. He should have been the boss, but I don't know whether he didn't want to or whether he was kind of overruled by these arrogant English people. You know, his knowledge was tremendous.
Yeah.
Because he'd lived with it, he'd grown up with it.
Yeah.
And the great thing was he gave me the space to start changing things. Thinking back on it, I should think I made his life hell sometimes, because I questioned everything. He'd say, we'll do this today, and I'd say, well, why do we do that? Why don't we do so-and-so?
Yeah.
Now, unlike Ron, who was the overall track boss,
Yeah.
he would have said in answer to why don't we do so-and-so, well, because we've always done it this way.
Yeah.
But Will never said that. He'd say, more or less say to me, well, try it,
Yeah.
you know, if you like, and think, okay, we'll try it. And what I quickly discovered was he would, metaphorically, he would let me get 1 foot over the edge of the cliff.
Yeah.
And then he would say, oh, I don't think I'd do that.
Yeah.
I think, stop. He'd say, well, what would you do, William Jones? He said, well, you're the boss. And we got a good working relationship and a good relationship outside the place as well. And so I was able, over those 4 years, to learn a lot from him and develop things and push things almost to the limit, knowing that he wouldn't let me fall off the edge, so to speak. You know?
Yeah.
Which is great, because by the time he retired,
Yeah.
I said, I want his job. So he said, okay. Because that's how it was in those days.
Yeah.
But when Will retired, it coincided with opening the line to the
All right.
So the previous year and a half, an awful lot of our effort had been from here up to the Alf, 2 miles of just taking up totally knackered track in swamps.
Yeah.
and laying track which frankly looked a lot better, but was nothing like, well, not like this. It was actually the stuff we bought from the Penryn Quarry.
All right.
Which was 1887. Which takes in another direction, the argument between bullhead and flat bottom. A lot of people will say, oh, of course, bullhead, it's a load of rubbish, isn't it? Nothing like this wonderful flat bottom. But although this is what we've got on virtually the whole railway, this is what I bought over the years because it was good quality second-hand stuff that we could afford. If there'd been good quality bullhead that we could have afforded, I definitely bought that.
Yeah.
If we could have got new, with new chairs and everything, with all the curves on this, it'd been the ideal thing.
Bess was the old station mistress of Tan of Auckland?
Yeah, Bessie Jones. I never quite knew what her whole name was. It was more than Bessie.
Yeah.
Probably considerably more. Because they had the little cafe in the house. They'd had that when the line was closed.
All right, okay.
And when the train started running to here again, because it was her cafe, but the train had got a buffet car on it, and so there was a bit of competition. And when I first came up around here and got to see what was going on, the train was parked right across in front of it, and all the big signs about ice cream from the buffet cars and whatnot, and it was almost a war, because Bessie Jones was hidden by the train, but she put her signs up and then the train would stop somewhere else. I mean, this place then, in 1960, 65, 66, around that time, it was so different than here. I mean, there was virtually nothing in those days that is like this. The old wooden building up there was there, all tatty and dilapidated. The goods shed, which is now the cafe, as far back as the piece built on the back, going at 90 degrees to it anyway, was the old railway goods shed. Everything was covered in grass. There was no fence. There was a siding came meandering down here. One went into the shed. And another one came round here, and there was a couple of little turntable things here. Right. So they could turn coal wagons with end doors and drop them over where it's been tarmacked at the bottom there.
Right.
And the coal merchants would come up from the local villages, and presumably they had their weighing machines, much like you used to see in the goods yards in any country station, you know. And we used to sit around here, and a lot of the time we were working within sight of this place, between here and Tyler's, which is, well, it's not far across there, but it's a mile and a quarter by rail, so which is a significant chunk of our section. And so we were within shouting distance, at least of Bessie, who had a tremendous voice. And she'd come out about 12 o'clock, she'd come out the front here somewhere, well, come and stand here, I think, and she'd shout, "William, I'm Ffestiniog!" His voice would go shrieking across the valley, so we'd be down there. So we'd traipse down the bottom, past the lake, up here, and have lunch up here. And quite often, it was quite a long lunch sometimes. You know. There was no sort of filling in how long you had for breaks or anything like that. There was a job to do, and as long as you did the job. You know. And we'd be up here in the evening sometimes, glorious summer evenings. It was very few trees. Of all those sort of trees, the forestry ones, they've all been planted since I came here. People talk about how there's not enough trees in the world. Well, they're all here.
They're all here. They are all here.
But they've grown furiously over the years, and all the ones they planted as well. Most of them since I came here. Actually, all the ones, all the forests across there, they're all planted in 1964, 65, and they've grown and they've grown and they've grown, because that's what they're there for, isn't it? And then they chop them down and they plant some more. Will used to tell me loads of tales about what happened in there. He kept his car in there. It's a little yellow Ford Anglia, would it have been? With a sort of sloped-in back window.
Right, okay.
Only a little car, LCC 898. He used to turn up at Minford sometimes, having driven all the way from here to Minford with a handbrake on and not known. And he'd turn up and we'd say, "What's that smell, Will?" So, it was a bit hot.
Oops.
And apparently when it was like a proper railway with goods trains and everything, they used to put vans in there We've got one or two of them still, haven't we?
Yeah.
And all sorts of local goods, and people come from miles around with horses and carts and unload of stuff.
Cool.
And then when the van was empty, there was some sort of a porter or something would push the thing out, ready for the train to pick up, or I don't know whether they attached it to the gravity train, whatever.
Yeah.
And so one day, Will said, they got the van wheels on a couple of keys, the wooden chair keys, you know, and just in front of it, they put 2 detonators. And when this guy came to push the thing out, because it fell straight onto the detonators inside the shed, and bang, and the bloke passed out and collapsed on the floor, and they thought he was dead. There was one, I always remember, bear in mind, back in days when he was started here and he was a station master, a lot of the quarrymen would come from miles around to catch the train, the early train up to the quarry. And one of them, I don't know where he came from, but apparently he used to go behind the goods shed, and there wasn't a toilet on the station, so he used to go behind the goods shed. And Will got annoyed about this bloke, because he watched him and worked out where he was going, so he got a load of stinging nettles and he put them amongst the grass, and then he watched to see who was rubbing his bum when he came, and so he knew who it was. All sorts of things like that.
Yeah.
But then of course along comes the commercial thing as the railway develops, and the old shed became a cafe, and it grew and it grew and it grew. But in there was things like Will's old motorbike that he'd fitted up with a circular saw to cut his firewood.
Different.
And one day he was cutting logs or something, or sleepers or whatever, and the saw jammed in it. So because the motorbike was driving it and it was still going, Wah! It wound itself along the chain and climbed up the wall.
Oh.
And they actually, until the thing got developed and put windows in and whatnot, there was this big groove in the wall that you could see. That must have been, you imagine the place, you know, with absolute tranquility. The bulk of this line has been widened in some form from the original one, and lots of it straightened out.
Yeah.
So this went round the outside on, well, to my mind, not a particularly sharp curve compared with a lot of the others. And then it went into the mountain, then out again, and it wiggled quite a lot.
Yeah.
Something, I think it was 1848 or something like that.
Right.
You'd have to look in the Boyd book to find that out. But before steam engines came here, something caused them to want to get rid of all this S-bends.
Yeah.
And they opted, instead of widening this round here, which it could well have done,
Yeah.
they opted for making a tunnel.
Right. Okay.
Now, there's quite a scree slope down here and at the other end. Maybe they thought that was unstable, so instead of filling out a bit, and I suppose in those days they had plenty of miners, people who could work with tunnelling, explosives and whatnot.
Yeah.
So maybe it was easier just to make a tunnel than it was to try and build something on the outside here and stabilise it. Yeah.
Less stable.
Because here it curves round before it goes out, so you'd have to build out a little bit, not a lot. But they built a tunnel. This section from Tannable to the Ath was reopened in 1968. So for the 2 years prior to that, we spent an awful lot of our time relaying the track, doing quite a lot of work on things that had collapsed here and there, and making the tunnel bigger, because in the time from reopening the line onwards we got bigger trains, particularly Linda and Blanche, and they wouldn't fit through here.
Right. Okay.
The new profile carriages with corridors, and you could get up and walk through them. There's no way they go through here.
Oh, right.
So a major part of reopening this bit was to make it bigger, and part of that was we can't alter the portal arches because they're a feature, they're heritage, although in those days we'd never taught much about heritage, from the way we do today.
Yeah.
Part of what we did, we actually dug down in the top of it
Right.
to see how many layers of bricks. Although it's an open rock bore, these things are brick lined in the arches. And we dug down and we found there was about 4 layers of bricks, because the one thought was, could we kind of slightly alter the arch and take one row of bricks off and try and make this bigger, but that was going to be an awful lot of work.
Yeah.
Another thought was make it square. It would look horrible.
Yeah.
So, and unfortunately, this in the way of things in those days, this was the hardest part of opening from Tunnaball to there, so we left it to the last because nobody had quite worked out how we were going to do it.
Yeah.
So in the winter of 1967-68, we spent a lot of time here, and it was a very, very cold winter. Heavy frost, beautiful weather, sunshine, you know, your breath came out and you could break it off, that sort of weather.
Yeah.
And so every morning when we got here, we had to set up, we had compressors and all sorts of things here, because what we actually did was all the way through it, we dug something off the floor, a bit off the sides and a lot off the roof. And we had 2 guys from Minor Ferrin Slate Mine who were actually employed on a contract from the quarry to here. And they were working on the sides and the roof, drilling and blasting.
Oh, right, okay.
And a lot of it was done with black powder,
Yeah.
which is gentle explosive, because the stuff in there is very brittle and there's not much ground cover. I mean, this is the deepest bit of it, and the other end is very little cover, so the water's constantly coming through, and when it's frozen it jacks it apart. It's very brittle, so they were drilling little holes, putting a little bit of powder in, and just boom. And then you'd put a bar in the hole because it was still there, do that, and poof, down it fell.
How long would it take to widen it then?
I can't remember, but it was the whole job to finishing it and laying the track and welding all the rails. Probably about 3 months.
Right, okay.
It was for us and the facilities we had and everything then, it was quite a big job. And we jackhammered the floor out to get a bit of depth. And through the arches, you can actually see, if you look along, that's the up one, the track dips through the arches and again at the other end, because we couldn't alter these. So we had to jackhammer out and get a gradient through at both ends. And the way we were working, we had a compressor, rail-mounted compressor at this end and another one at the other end.
Right.
And they were all locked up with padlocks and bars to pull out and everything. And the first thing you did every morning when you got here, with numb fingers, was to take the padlocks off and go all these out and start these great hairy things with a starting handle. And they took half an hour to start. By the time everybody had taken their jackets off because we were all stinking hot, you know. And then you'd spend the day jackhammering away in there. Pipes would burst and flail around inside it, and then it was pretty ghastly. So when we'd gone through and essentially made the place bigger in every direction, as you can see, it's basically there's a slant on the rock that way, but there's other ones this way. I can't think offhand of all the geological names of faults and God knows what, but they're all over the place, you know. And it's about the worst place on earth to make a tunnel because there's no grain that you can count on, and it's a bit like, see all the little bits, all the little layers, and if you tip off a little bit, it's a bit like the skin of an onion. There's 3 more behind it and 3 more behind them and so on. So having made it all bigger, it disturbed the whole thing. And so there was quite a long period of kind of settlement, and we came here every month with wind from the mine. Came up here with the compressor and all the tools and the floodlights and everything, went through it, knocked off the loose bits and everything. And after a couple of years of doing that, we concluded that eventually we'll see daylight. if we keep on taking bits off.
Right.
So let's not do it anymore, and we'll start looking on the floor on the weekly inspection, and if we find anything, try and locate where it's come from and see whether it's worth,
Yeah.
decide what to do with it.
Yeah.
And there's a bit at the far end that it actually got 2 rails mounted on these bars, and there was going to be some mesh put in, supposedly to stop what looked like a dodgy bit.
Yeah.
The mesh never got put in because of time,
Yeah.
and the weight of the stuff hanging up there actually brought out a piece about the size of a football.
Right.
And we were working up above the tunnel, 6 o'clock shifts. We walked up through the tunnel one morning, and there was this bit lying between the rails. And so we thought, that's not very good. So we had a little windy phone with us then in those days, and I had to climb up the pole to plug it in. And I rang the controller and said, no trains until Ron, who was still the boss then, has come up and examined the tunnel. And I had to get him out of bed, and he wasn't happy. But one of the things that we'd done, because of the way the basic level is like that, and because there's not an awful lot out there until you come to the old route, what we were anxious about was that nothing fell out of this bit that would work its way across and undermine the kind of slab.
Yes.
So we built these,
Okay.
and they're just the brick shuttering with concrete behind them, wherever it looked a bit dicky, and there was, I think it was a wise move. There's tales that this tunnel at the far end had metal sheeting off a U-boat to line the sides of it, which frankly I don't believe, because at the far end of it, only at the far end where there's very little ground cover, they put in, I think it was 6 arches made of old rails, double lead rails like that, bolted about there and there and there and there, and then there was timber filling in behind them. But the story in Boyd's book and various says it is plating off U-boat.
All right.
But if there had been, it must have rotted away and they put timber in.
Yeah.
But behind the timber, in 1968, this would have been when we started on this, January, there was loads of old rock debris, which looked like they'd been there for many, many years.
And those.
So, frankly, I don't believe the U-boat thing. But since we've got 2 arches in that end now, they came from a coal mine somewhere, and they had to be cut and reprofiled, and we had to channel a sort of way through to get them in, to get the loading gauge that the train could go through. And then the idea was to sort of board all round them as well. But virtually nothing has fallen down at that end to justify the amount of work. So, I nominally retired 3 years ago from the point of view of stopping examining the thing. And certainly up to then, it had been many, many years completely trouble-free.
So it's fairly stable then, I hope?
Yeah, but it's still, it's brittle. It's touchy, it's got very little ground cover. And if somebody decided, let's take some of this loose rock out, they'd start the whole process again. But see, one day, I think things like that need to be addressed. Because there's various places through there, these 1 inch, 1 1/4 inch, I think they were, bars have been put in. Where potentially this could try and slide down there. And these I always understood from when, it was an indicator. If we ever found that the gap had disappeared or they were starting to, and other places we put little bits of plywood in cracks where things looked as if they might move, and if they ever fell out, it said, well, this was one of the conundrums you had, if it fell out, was it because the rock had moved or because the thing had dried up so much, because we'd had a long dry summer and it fell out. So you had to make your mind. But they were guidance things. They weren't panic buttons. Guidance. And other than the football that landed on the track at the far end, we've never had a panic with this thing. Unless you disregard the things that landed on the roof weren't actually landing on the roof, because it was the behaviour of the couplings going through the dip,
Right.
where the bob weights on the couplers with eccentrics to pull them tight, as they went up and down, suddenly this thing would swing up and it would smack into the foot plate in between one carriage and the other.
Making
bong!
a bang.
And we get a report, oh, there's a rock falling on the train. So you come up here and you look everywhere, even quarter of a mile down there in case it got carried down. But that's what it was. So we reprofiled the track through here and it never happened again. So there you go.
Just outside the tunnel, we've got these pieces of rail which are held very precariously held by 2 chains.
Yeah.
Which look like they're holding up the mountainside. However, I have a suspicious feeling that they wouldn't actually do a lot if it moved very suddenly and with force.
I think you're right. In fact, perhaps we shouldn't even stand here. This is part of all the work that was done around the tunnel, because there was great debate about this bit. There's obviously been cut under, and debate as to why the portal's not further out to protect it. Should we build an extended portal? All sorts of things. But there was no signs on the ground of any bits coming down. There was ideas of cutting it off, but then you'd have to go way up there and you disturb the whole mountain. And you start, once you've unlocked that process, you never know when it'll stop. And you wish you'd never started. So this is typical of what I've seen in some of the slate mines I've been in. And because the guy who did the work in here with us, well, the 2 guys, were from Mynydderyn, and he was the chief sort of rockman, I think he was called, but his prime job was to stabilise the roof or inspect the roofs in the chambers, and he had an 80-foot long ladder that was up in the roof, and it had ropes in several directions. It wasn't leaning on anything, it was held on the ropes. Right. And he'd go up it, and he could, by pulling on these ropes, he could move himself around.
Right, okay.
Yeah, and he'd drill holes and he'd put things like this and he'd knock loose bits down and everything. And he took a party that was down there one day, and he challenged somebody to go up the ladders. I thought, nothing to it. And I got about 6 steps up and it was going like that. Anyway, so he went up it, way up into the roof, hell of a way up. And he pulled on the ropes and he moved right across to the side of the chamber. And then there was a tunnel that had gone across before the chamber ran into the next one, and he disappeared into the little hole at the side of it, and he reappeared down here behind us. But yeah, he did this, and we always understood a lot of these sort of things. No way would that hold up that mountain if it started coming down, but it might give you a clue.
If it was bouncing up now.
If there was something heavy frost or something, if something started splitting off, and you noticed a sag. You see there's a bent piece of bar, round bar up there, and there's another one there. They did have a saw cut in them, I'm sure, but it's been so long it's all rusted. And the idea was you could hang a plumb line. But the problem was there's always air movement around here. You'll never get a totally still day. So if you did hang a plumb line down and the thing was not quite on the saw cut, what would you do? Would you panic?
No.
So that's a bit of a, I can't think of the right term, red herring or something like that. Because it would tell you that something was moving, but probably it's just the wind. But in all these years, there's been no indication at all of any problem. We've never found anything on the ground here. I mean, little flaky bits you'll find everywhere. But
well, that's good to know that it's not going to come down anytime soon.
Well, it is, yeah.
Especially when you're stood underneath it.
Quite reassuring. Now, there was a scheme, I can't remember at quite what stage in the process, of getting rid of the tunnel completely. And a bloke called Blaster Bates was brought up here. I wasn't involved with that. Apparently the guy looked at it and says, yeah, I could get rid of it, where would you like me to put it? So more or less, I could put it down there.
Right.
But then we'd be left with this massive great mountain, freshly blasted out of the bottom. Character of the line's gone with it. People down the bottom, the road down there is blocked up. You know, not quite that simple, is it, really? So I designed a alignment round here some years ago when we were debating about whether we should eventually go round the outside as a contingency. If this ever proved troublesome in the future, then you've either got to do something with it, like line it, but before you can line it, you've got to make it bigger to put the thickness of the lining, or go round the outside by trimming and widening. And I just, on a big survey we had of the whole thing, I got an alignment round here that you could actually get 30 miles an hour, bearing in mind our maximum speed is 20. And the twist into the cant you need would be very, very gentle, because our carriages are what we call twist intolerant, to stop them rocking about, make them stiff. So the track's got to be very good, and it mustn't twist too much. But I could still get 30 mile an hour around it.
There you go.
Not that we'd ever run 30 mile an hour, but as soon as a 10 mile an hour restriction through here, if ever timing became critical, then
it would be,
you know, if you could get 20 through this bit, you might gain 20 seconds maybe. So put a cost to it. Not quite like the East Coast line, is it, where you want to get to Edinburgh 10 minutes earlier. So you couldn't justify it. There you go. That's the story of the tunnel. It says 1854 on the side of it, Boston Lodge 1854, so it was presumably cast at Boston Lodge, and there are vague tales about how another one was made at a later date, but they used the same patterns, so it still says 1854. But in 1960s, this was a cast iron bridge with, there's a car coming, there it goes. Underneath where we're standing, there were two pretty massive cast iron arches, and then these two on the outside, which are more ornamental than anything, and loads of cross bracing between them. And because it was an arch, then you know, cast iron in compression is okay. But if there was anything wrong at the ends of it, so that it could try and flatten the arch, then it wouldn't be okay. And there was a bit of concern about it. Then the Earl of Merioneth got built, which was somewhat heavier. Nobody at the time knew how heavy it was. The old double engines, the heaviest axles were the outboard ones, so there was only one heavy axle on here. With the new one, the heaviest axles were the inboard ones, so there was two of them on here. So we did some deflection tests on it, and it moved. So we debated at great length what we were going to do about it, whether we were going to replace it, but no, it's such a lovely bridge. It's in so many, it's part of the old railway, it's heritage and all that, you know. So what we've actually done was turn it into a reinforced concrete bridge, but retaining all the cast iron except the cross bracing, because we had to take all those out to make. So how it was to start with, there were slate slabs all across it, and the main big beams had an uprise in the middle to shoulders that the slabs could sit on. So it was like a slate deck. And the sleepers on it, originally it had chairs that had been specially cast, so they were thicker on one side to put a cant on it. So then at one stage we relayed the thing, and we had some sleepers actually sliced on a taper, so we could get the right cant on it. Then when we came to rebuild the thing, we had to strip everything off it, take all the slate slabs, cut the bracings out, and at one stage we found that actually now the thing was a little bit wobbly. And we thought that it was well supported at each end, but it wasn't as good as we thought. So obviously we've been lucky for a lot of years. You know? So we actually had to design and construct a temporary bridge, like an A-frame with rails, supported by 4 carry timbers at each corner, to get a deck underneath that we could work from, and a bridge that would support the shuttering and the existing bridge in case it wobbled too much. So then we had to cast effectively 3 beams with loads and loads of reinforcing, all because of the angle of the thing. Then the design of all that was pretty complex, because it's an arch and every one will be offset a bit, and all the bracings. It was a massive job. We had 6 weeks to do it. It snowed quite a lot in the middle of it. Somebody planned a special train right through the middle of it, which obviously couldn't run.
I bet that goes through.
And it was well, it did a few, but I managed to smooth it out because they were a party of Americans.
Okay.
And I had to go to their hotel over near Betws-y-Coed somewhere for dinner with them in the evening to tell them all about the railway and that they couldn't have half of their special train. I survived that. They turned up on the next day. We showed them the bridge, why they couldn't have a train. Took them down the forestry road to a crossing just down there. Unfortunately, the train was propelled up to here, and it had the Alco Mountaineer, which of course is an American engine. So I said to them, "Hey, we put that on specially for you." And they said, "Gee, Alco, wow!" So everybody was happy. See?
Indeed.
But
luck was on your side.
it was an interesting job. But we had a concrete mixer wagon that Andy Putnam had built, these concrete batching things, one there and one there. 2 concrete mixers and loads of, and they had big bunkers full of all the aggregate, and there were just loads of people mixing concrete on both sides to get it in, and because you had to do it all in one go, each one in one day, you know. And there it was, snowing and all sorts of problems, and we managed to get it done. And the general manager of the day, he'd been patting people on the head at Boston Lodge about engines they'd rebuilt and everything. So I said to him, "Don't you think perhaps we should get a bit of recognition?" So he rather reluctantly, he came up to Tanner Bulk and we had a little tea party. And he said, "Well done, chaps," and then he buggered off quick. Because he didn't understand us, because, well, I'm sure you've worked this out, that people who work on railway tracks are different.
Yes.
So today, here we go. We actually had, I can't remember who it was, some firm sponsored the repainting of it. And the colour scheme and everything, and it really needs doing again. Now, a good clean wouldn't hurt it, but a repaint. But it's such a feature of the area. People drive through here. If we'd replaced it with just either concrete sections or a steel bridge or whatever.
It would lose a piece of heritage if you
Indeed,
got rid of it.
It's such a part of the railway, you know, and it still says 1854, and it's still a cast iron bridge.
So here we have a milepost, which is slightly different to most normal mileposts.
Well, certainly the ones that you're used to.
Not especially the ones I'm used to, which is a yellow post, which just has 1/4 of a mile, half a mile, 3/4 of a mile, and the actual mileage.
There's still mileage, not miles, not kilometres.
Yep, miles.
Yeah, because the Welsh Island's in kilometres.
Is it?
Yeah.
Well, there we go. So it's slightly different to us. So,
Well, it's the old Ffestiniogs thing. Their mileage at one time was measured from Blaenau downwards, and what those dots mean effectively is 1/4 of a mile to a mile post that way and 3/4 to that way, and every 4th one will be a square one, I think, with the miles, because that's from somewhere up in Blaenau that's not there now, probably the old Diffwys branch, and the spiral at the Ath wasn't there, which is 1/2 a mile long. So they have no relevance to
the actual
the line today, and of course from many years ago the zero was at the other end, but right round the harbour, not in the station.
Okay.
So quite which one's which, and I'm assuming these are from Blaenau, but I may be wrong. A few years ago, there was a gang of us down on Gwyndy Bank near Minford, working there, and there's a wide spot in the middle. When the train came, got out the way onto it, and there was a big slab of stone lying down. And somebody says, "What's that?" "It's a big slab of stone, isn't it?" And they turned it over, and it was one of these things.
All right.
And well, this raised a bit of interest, you know, because we knew every here and there you could see where they'd been.
Yeah.
Because they were mostly built into a wall, but there was virtually none of them in situ.
Yeah.
And people got interested and thought, "Oh, let's renovate this thing," and so they did it up and stood it up. And that was the beginning, and by that time some of the volunteer gangs we got, like us all, we're getting old.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a heavy job, heaving ballast and rails and whatnot now. So some of them moved into doing this, and it took off big time, and virtually, I don't know how many of them they've done, but the majority certainly. They've got new ones, they've found the old ones, or they've made new ones made, and they've been fitting them. And they're a very interesting feature.
So they're signifying the old mileage, I suppose.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. But quite where the zero of this particular thing is, I don't know, you'd have to talk to them.
Once again, kind of keeping heritage.
Yeah, and it's been recognised as a significant project, and it's even got onto the sort of list for the Heritage Award thing. It hasn't actually got an award,
but
it's got onto it, which I think is quite satisfying.
Yeah.
Because effectively you could say, well, what is the point of them? It doesn't help the train go along. Why do people bother doing that? But it's just, it's one of the little bits that makes up the whole, isn't it? And here and there, like that one, you can actually see from the train.
Yeah.
A lot of them where the cutting's so thin you'd never see them. But it'll get people thinking, well, what's that? And they might ask, and it's different, isn't it?
Different. It
and
holds a story to it.
It's part of, I've always felt Ffestiniog Railway, amongst all these so-called heritage railways, it must be one of the truest heritage railways, because we got the whole train set.
Yeah.
You know, it is the whole of the original route, most of the vehicles, and if we haven't got them, we've built, replica one. So this is part of the train set.
Yeah.
You know, just the same as the signals and the stations and everything. And it adds to the, what's the word, the ambience.
Yeah.
Yes, good word.
So, when Will retired, you asked if you could have his job, and you were told you had to find an office.
Yeah, it was a bit presumptuous of me, really, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But, this would be, can't remember the date, but it was a year or two after I'd effectively got his job, and so I had the line from Portmaddock to Leath as all mine to maintain and renew and everything, and whoever I could get to help me. Yeah. And one day we were working up by Penryn Crossing. Arroway, the general manager, cycled up there, and he said, Ronnie Bear was the boss guy I told you about before. He's moving on because he's up onto the new works beyond the house. And it's all yours, jump, he said. And then he got on his bike and he cycled off, and then he kind of turned around, nearly fell off, and he shouted, "You'll have to find yourself an office." So I found this, which was, well, I suppose you need to know something about this place, really, to put some context on it. This Minford yard, as you'll find in all the history books and loads of films and everything, was the interchange of the FR's slate trains coming down, the Cambrian, the Great Western, British Railways, they came in here as well, and transship onto them, and then they pulled out in 1970ish, I think it was. And various of the slate mines had their own areas of this place, and they bring slates down and then chop them to size and put holes in them and sell them from here. And all these little huts around the place, one here, there's more around the far end. There used to be some up there till we demolished them because we wanted walls for building, stone walls, so we demolished heritage buildings. I never said that. And so this was one of the slate company's huts. It was to quite a large extent a jungle with tracks half buried in the ground
Yeah.
that disappeared into the jungle.
Right.
Like down there was a sea of mud and the BR tracks and dereliction down there. Disappeared up there, trees all over the place. There was a few more tracks, and of course there was a BR tracks came in the far end of the shed there, and there's one came all the way around there and right up almost as far as you can go up there.
Yeah.
And then there was more narrow gauge ones the other side. And you know, it was quite an adventure wandering around here. You find wagons deep in the trees at the back of it, down the hole there, the coal hole. It's been called by people for years. This shed, which was the old railway's transfer shed with the Cambrian Railway, we came in the far end of it. The FR's track never went in through this end.
All right. Okay.
Because the track that goes down there at a set of points a bit further down, track went round the back of here, down the wharf that was down the middle, where the dull red building is now.
Yeah.
And then came back in from the other end. And then there was like a timber platform staging for transfer of general goods, I suppose.
Yeah.
And then in the closed years, some timber guy who carved up firewood or timber, I think, had used the place, and it was just full of sawdust, loads of sawdust, and where the track was down there was half filled with sawdust.
Right.
And we spent wet days shoveling sawdust out of it into wheelbarrows and taking it out, and then we put a track in through here so we could start keeping our departmental train set in there. So we kind of gradually developed the place to make it more of an active, permanent way depot. You hear tales, don't you, about the builder and decorator who has the worst house in the street.
Yeah.
And the track outside the plate layers engine shed is the worst bit of track on the railway.
Right.
Well, it was. It's still not very good. We kind of progressed to having our own train. We were allowed to have an engine. We'd had a petrol trolley for some years, but I was the proud driver and maintainer on it. Because when I started here, Ronnie, the boss, who didn't like getting up in the morning but drove the trolley, said to me, "Do you know anything about petrol engines?" And of course I said yes, because that sounded like the correct answer. So he said, "Oh, well, you can drive this thing." So he didn't have to get up and come to work. Then we progressed to Mary Ann, which was the engine that we used as a prime engine for the whole of the rebuilding up to Leah. Which is a horrible machine without a roof, ghastly thing with only 2 gears. It used to break its chain, it'd break its drive shaft, everything that possibly could go wrong used to go wrong. But it pulled the train, and it didn't like starting. And when we got the use of this place, we could put it in there. At least it was kind of warm and dryish, you know. But the only way we could start the lousy thing in the morning was to push it out in the shed, or tow it out with a dumper truck we had out to here, and then roll it down the hill and bump start it. And if it got to the bottom and it hadn't started, we had to push it back up again.
Great.
Yeah, and so we had that for about 2 years, and then by an act of piracy, I took the Molwyn.
You took the Molwyn?
Yeah, well, Paul Jukes, who was the works manager, he used to come home on it. He used it as his private transport, and he used to leave it up in the station up there outside his house. Well, I needed an engine one morning, and it was there, so I took it. And then we locked it up in here and said it's ours now. And it didn't like starting either. And so in the winter, and this sounds a bit outrageous, having just said this place was used by a timber guy, and there was sawdust everywhere, and the wooden platform that was made of half-round bits of wood on stone walls, underneath it was full of sawdust.
Right, okay.
And when it was cold, we put the old Molwyn in there, and we got a sort of road workers stove thing, you know, with a big chimney, and we'd start it on old wooden chair keys to get it going, and fill it up with coal, put a lid on it, put a few things so it wouldn't get too much draft, and it would stay hot. It was still hot in the morning, right? And this, leave it by the side of the engine, which people would say, it's a stupid thing to do, wasn't it? What happened if it catch fire? Well, it didn't. never caught fire, and the engine would start in the morning.
So this is the ballast chute that you were telling us about, with where you say they drop the ballast, and you get 3,000 tonnes of it through this year.
Well, particularly when we were building the new track from the aft upwards all round the spiral and on towards Blaenau. And because we laid it from this end working up, then the ballast had to come from this end, which was kind of the wrong way round, really. If we started again, I think I wanted to start from Blaenau, working down, because gravity would help then.
Yeah.
So everything we loaded here, we were having to haul miles up the line with these little time-expired engines. But it's all part of the fun of it.
Indeed.
And I mean, originally this was the coal chute, and there was a BR track. Well, actually there was two of them at one time, just on the top there where the road is now. And coal used to come in here from some South Wales colliery, and it would come, or when I knew the place. And when I started here, our department was the biggest on the railway. I put the number employed up to 11, I think.
Yeah.
And 6 of them were in this department. And so anything like coal wagons that turned up and had to be emptied, they couldn't possibly do it down there. It was too important. We had to do it.
Yeah.
Well, it's nothing to do with the track, obviously. And you get these 16-ton coal wagons up there. And the little trucks down here to load it into. And the first thing you had to do was open the door with a long crowbar, and you had to knock the things up and jump out the way when the door and about 3 tons of coal would come roaring out.
So if you weren't quick enough, you were buried under coal.
We go down the chute.
Or down the chute.
And then, of course, you had to get in it and start shoveling, and by the time you got to the far corners of it, you were black as they come. And the little doorway seemed an awful long way away that you were trying to shovel through, and then when you'd done that, you think, wow, that's finished. Oh, there's another one there. And then we started getting ballast, spent ballast from BR initially, which frankly was a load of muck. It was kind of clay and boulders. And it got worse when the ballast cleaners started doing deep digs, and you never knew what you were going to find in it. And you find screw couplings and bits of buffers and springs out of suspensions and whatever you like. And the thing had been modified at some time so that above, these weren't the original chutes. The old chute above them was a kind of a screen. And the idea was we threw the ballast onto the screen, and the dirt fell through into wagons there, and the ballast fell into wagons here.
So you could sort of...
But it didn't work because the stuff was such a load of muck. The screen got clogged up very quickly, so everything fell into the wagon. When the army came here in 1966, I think it was, they bought some new ballast for beyond Tanabalt, the bit that they relayed, right? And I said then, right, that's it, we're never going to touch that filthy muck again, we want new ballast. And so from then on we got new ballast from the quarry just over there. And it would come in, let's think, had the railway tracks gone by then? No, the railway track by then had been slewed across that way, so that we got a roadway down here. And it came in little Thames trader trucks with 9 tons of ballast.
9 tons of ballast.
And we could just squeeze it into 3 of our wagons. And then the lorries got bigger and bigger, and they ended up with 6-wheelers coming here with 17 tons of ballast. And we got really pretty good at loading it. We could put it into about 5 of our wagons with hardly a drop on the ground. And from the lorry arriving, he was gone in 15 minutes.
That's very good.
But there was working out the system and getting the lorry drivers trained. But no, you can't get it all in 4 wagons. Because that's what they tried to do. They knew there wasn't much left, so they tried and shoot a lot. So we cured that by not signing their thing until we'd lifted every last little bit of stone off the floor and cleaned it all up. See, so. And gradually we educated them, and at one time when we were expanding up Llyn-y-Stradau and on up that way, we'd get back here in the evening and there'd be 4 or 5 lorries waiting here for us from a Rhwng quarry by then, because it was good stone, much better than that place. And if anybody from that place watches this film, then I have to say that they rebuilt their plant and they made the best ballast in the world. but by then Rhwng had closed. And we'd have 4, even 5 lorries waiting for us here, and within an hour and a bit we got them all into wagons and they'd all gone.
Right.
We got really good at it.
Yeah.
You know. But there's a few exciting things happened here. We've had runaways down here, because it's up the top of here, it's about 1 in 35, I think it is. And various things come from the top and gone hurtling down here. I got the Mary Ann one day between the chutes, in case you wondered why that chute is a funny shape. It hit the corner and forced it up, forced itself under, and then the chute pinged down again behind it. And it took me the rest of the day to dismantle the chute to get the thing out again.
Right.
And if nobody believes that tale, if they look at the armoured end of Mary Ann with the armour plating on it, and there's a groove in it that exactly matches the corner of that. And it wasn't a bullet in the war, it was that chute.
Wow. And this is the weighbridge. This is your main office after you moved up from the little one down there.
Yeah, it's a bit more salubrious, this one.
A bit more solid as well by the looks of it.
Yeah, I mean it was the weigh house for all the slate that came down.
Yeah.
Which all came down this line, and there was 2 weighing tables there, and the machines inside there. Yeah. But they were in an awful state, and everything was sinking into the ground, and every time we drove over them, you never knew whether the thing was going to collapse into the hole.
Yeah.
So eventually we took them out. They're all down there somewhere, all the bits and pieces, and we filled it all in and put ordinary track over it, and then we took the machinery out of here, and I turned it into my office.